just over a year ago, I became the Middlesex historian. I would like to thank you all so much for joining us today to celebrate the complete restoration of our 5 historical photo murals. I would also like to thank the individuals who have made today possible. Wynn Harper, who I refer to as our fearless leader, because I absolutely have so much to learn from his leadership and speaking skills. Elaine and Jim Hilton, who not only were on our planning committee, but who also have painstakingly researched our presentation today. Bob Mincer, over there, who offered us the opportunity to host the event here today, and also assisted with engineering our very intricate photo display setups with 2x4s and C-clamps. Mrs. Deb Bronson, who assisted in the making of today's program and just all around got our projector. She's always doing many things. And our 2 speakers today, Gary Albright and Ken Poole, who have taken time out of their own busy schedules to educate us on the restoration process, and local artist Jane Loomis Gould. Those who helped coordinate transportation of the artwork, because believe it or not, transporting these 5 photo murals is not easy, especially to make sure they don't break or get damaged. And of course, the Middlesex Host Company for allowing us to utilize their beautiful space today. Thank you all so much. With that being said, today is bittersweet for me, as I am sure it is for some others. We would not be here today if it had not been for the efforts of former Middlesex historian Dan Robeson. Within his time with the Middlesex Historical Program, he worked to secure the grant from the Greater Hudson Heritage Network for the restoration of these photo murals in 2014. Even though he is unable to be here with us today, 11 years after this project began, we thank him graciously for his time and attention to restoring our prized photographs. I'm going to actually break for a moment from my prepared speech to very quickly touch on something that happened yesterday and touch on the blue-framed elephant in the room. We were here yesterday morning setting up, as you do for an event, and at one point we noticed Jim was gone. Jim Hilton had left. And I think everybody else knew what was happening except for me. And all of a sudden I see him pulling back in, and he now has a trailer attached to his truck. And it looked empty. And I was very confused as to what was happening. And Elaine quickly hurried over to me, and she put her hand on my arm, and she looked at me with the sweetest smile of anticipation and excitement, and said, "We have a surprise for you." And yesterday, I guess this has been in the works for at least 2 or 3 weeks now, and they've been keeping it from me, but we finally have received photo mural number 6 of 8. Very grateful so much, Jim, Elaine, everybody who was involved for getting that back home to us. So you'll notice a couple parts in my speech that was prepared a couple weeks ago that now are a little incorrect. Because I did not know that we in fact had found photo mural number 6. So in early America, one-room schoolhouses became a popular way to educate children in rural areas where resources of larger communities such as dedicated buildings and teachers were scarce. As such, our local communities had numerous one-room schoolhouses sprinkled across our area. We are lucky enough that some of these schoolhouses were photographed in the 18 and early 1900s. In April 1953, Anson Wagner presented 8 photo murals of local schoolhouses to Middlesex Valley Central School. 5 of those are seen here today, of course, now 6. Guy Hamilton and Jane Loomis Gould were commissioned to paint the black and white photographs, thus making them photo murals. These pieces of art hung in the hallways and common rooms of the Middlesex Valley School building for decades before being generously donated to the Middlesex Heritage Group in 1993. When they, I was only 5 years old, were presented with them, it was clear they needed restoration. Once notified that we had received the grant from the Greater Hudson Heritage Network, we enlisted the expertise of Gary Albright to bring the photos back to life. The photo murals here today are of Overacres Corner Schoolhouse, the East Hill Schoolhouse, the Potter Round Schoolhouse, Middlesex Old Brick Schoolhouse, and the Rushville High School. Overacres Corner Schoolhouse was built in 1874 and closed its doors in June 1938. It did not have the modern-day convenience of running water or electricity and was heated by a large round stove during the colder seasons. In 1998, 50 years after its closure, Overacres was reopened as a local museum after several years of renovations. Today, Overacres is still a shining example of one-room schoolhouses and continues to be used by the Heritage Group for events. Restoration efforts are continuously monitored and undertaken by the Heritage Group, as Overacres is the only building within these photographs that is still standing today, and it is located on the corner of North Vine Valley Road and State Route 364. The East Hill Schoolhouse was also known as the Wagger or the Chase District. It was built in 1866 to replace a log schoolhouse that had either burned or was torn down. East Hill School had an attic, unlike some of the other schools. It is remembered by former teacher Adelaide Clark Robies that older boys would sneak into the attic to scare younger children and chew tobacco. It closed in 1930 and was located on the corner of Button Road and Upper Hill Road. Only the foundation remains today. It is curious, however, that in the building in the painting is red, when most of our records actually indicate it is white or light colored as it sits in photo mural number 6. In the picture, you can also see Roy Dutton and Fenton Wagger, who was Anson Wagger's brother, climbing the flagpole. And that picture was taken in 1900. The Potter Round Schoolhouse was built in 1838. It was bare bones with dirt floors, a stone fireplace, and benches made from split logs. The walls were made with fieldstone and faced with cobblestone that was brought from Lake Ontario by oxen. A former teacher joked that no one had to sit in a corner. Sadly, in 1920, the wooden section of the building burned, and when it was requested to be rebuilt, the New York State Department of Education denied the request, and instead a new wooden school was built in 1920 in its place. This school was located on the corner of West Swamp Road and Voorhees Road. The Middlesex Old Brick Schoolhouse, also known as the Union School, was built in 1869 for around $3,000. At the time of its opening, there were 3 teachers and 65 students that used the building. The photograph you see was taken on Arbor Day in 1884, hence the celebration attire. The building was torn down in 1903 and a 2-story school was built as its replacement. These buildings were located on Church Street in Middlesex Center. To give a quick rundown of the rest of our event today, please obviously feel free to view the 5-6 photo murals placed around the room. We also have copies of the 1953 Ganondagan yearbook, where an article about the photo murals is bookmarked, and also a copy of the November 1933 edition of National Geographic magazine, where the photo mural showing Overacres Schoolhouse was featured in their article, New York, an Empire Within a Republic. You will also notice a somewhat random painting over there. Interestingly, I have been admiring this work of art for years, not realizing this was a Jane Loomis Gould original until recently. My husband's family owned and operated Williams Family Farm in Naples for decades. Jane was a treasured friend of his great-grandparents, who often not only became a helping hand on the farm, but who would also enjoy many days of leisure in their company. She painted this family portrait for them, and in it includes my husband's great-grandparents, grandparents, father, uncle, and even Jane herself. Most of the previous farm acreage is now the Naples Community Park. I thought it would be fun to include this in today's event to showcase Jane's unique and supreme artistry. We do have an edit on today's program, and next, Gary Albright will be speaking on his process of restoration. Elaine Hilton, Middlesex Heritage Group member and local historical encyclopedia, will be speaking about Anson Wagger and the Rushville High School, which was the last of the photo murals to be completed. followed by Ken Poole speaking on Jane Loomis Gould. Finally, President of the Middlesex Heritage Group, Wynn Harper, will be closing our dedication ceremony. Over the past several years, Gary Albright has painstakingly restored each of the murals you see here today. Mr. Albright has been an art conservator for over 40 years and has been in private practice for over 20 of those years. We cannot begin to thank him enough for his expertise, efforts, and attentiveness to this project. As I'm sure he is, we are all delighted to see this project to its completion. However, now you have a new one. Please help me welcome Gary Albright, paper and photograph conservator.
Listening on. Now.
Yes. Yeah.
Can this light be turned off? Do anybody know?
Yep.
Will it turn off every light? I have given this talk a couple times before, so some of you heard it, but since there's no script, it'll be different than any of the others. And I'll try to incorporate a little bit more about the other ones as we go. So this was the first one that was treated, the Over Corner School. I haven't been here in Middlesex for a couple years, and driving down, I wasn't sure I was on the right road. And then I saw the school, and I was, oh, thank you, Lord. I'm in the right place. So I knew it was great. So when we started these treatments, this was my studio, and it was the basement of my house in Honeyway Falls. And that studio was much larger than the one where we treated the last, I don't know, three, at least three of them. So that gives you some idea of what it is. That one of the ones we treated, the one over here, was so big that you go down, it's in the basement of my condo. Okay? So you go down the steps and you have to go to a landing, turn, and go around it. Well, to get that into my studio, I made a equal-sized cardboard cutout. And I had to learn how to take it down, kick the bottom out, put it or turn it upright again, and move it around. And it had to be done exactly the same way, or you wouldn't have gotten it in or out of the base. So that was quite a challenge, but we did it, and so we've got to treat them all. So this shows you one of the limitations of my new space. This is still the old space, but I don't have this type of room. I mean, I'm in one room, and it's like, what is that, about 15 by 15 or something like that? And I don't have space like this to take good pictures. So forgive me if some of the pictures of a couple of later objects are not as good as these early ones. So the first thing we do before the treatment is to photograph it. Let me go back. Yeah. And so I'm going to show you some details of this as before we began any treatment so that you can see why we needed to do the treatment. So this is the first one. Now, all of these were unprotected before they came to me. So that meant that for many years they were sitting out basically in the elements, easily handled. When they would clean the frames, they often would go up and scratch the edges of the objects, or if they put any sort of cleaner on the cloth that they used, that cleaner got into the photograph and could stain it. So you can see some of the evidence of all of those problems. So right here you can see in this one, there's some loss already that is obvious. It's not too big considering the whole object, but still it's an inch or so square. There were scratches from it, as you can see through here, right? This is evidence of where somebody had done something like taken a key or something, along the edge of the frame and scraped across the photograph at the bottom there. Also notice the difference in color. You'll see that in a couple of the other details between this area, which was covered up, and this area. Because this, being exposed to all of that light, has bleached out to some extent, so the color has changed. So this shows it even more dramatically. That was the original blue, right? And now you can see how it has changed to a yellow. Now, if you look at the real object, we're over here, it's not quite that yellow, and I'm sure that that's partly a result of the photography and the light that was used to take the photographs, but it was yellow. This sort of thing would have been caused by the moisture that it was exposed to over the years. In many cases, I have removed those types of stains, and been able to replace that with a color so that you don't see it anymore, at least get them reduced somewhat. But in this case, I just reduced it a little, I didn't try to remove it. So here's the other edge. Again, notice the change in color. Plus, somebody had put like a piece of tape on it and pulled it off, and took the image with it. And then these areas of abrasion, these are in the lower right corner of the object. And this just shows you just another detail. But notice, you may have noticed already, this kind of pattern here, that's a halftone pattern. And that was used whoever enlarged these, that was used to help give the piece some definition so that it had some clearer lines to it, as just a way of helping to make these that large. That would not have been an easy process. Okay? I should have said from the beginning, if you have questions, please ask, because I'm not planning on sticking around for the whole program, so I have another event at 1 o'clock, so you'll need to ask as we go. And I show you this one in a different type of light so that you can see how the surfaces were messed up a little bit. Now, I just learned that it is possible that these might have been coated with Krylon back in the early days. Krylon is an acrylic spray. If so, I saw no evidence of that when I was treating them, but if so, then maybe this sort of haziness is a result of some of that spray having been there. Who knows? Who knows? Krylon is actually an acrylic. It's a pretty good material. You can still buy it. I think it's still sold as Krylon. And it does not yellow over time. It's pretty hard to get it yellow. Yeah?
There's a letter on the back of that one talking about Krylon.
So probably
Somebody
they
asked
use
if
it.
it's used or not.
Yeah, they may have, but it could also have deteriorated so much over the years that it's kind of hard to see it anymore. So maybe it was. Maybe it was. Again, notice the difference between the edge and the middle. And thinking of that Krylon again, the one thing that could have happened to it from being exposed to a lot of light and humidity was that it could have gotten a little cloudy. And you're seeing some of that here. So that is a possibility for these having been coated. There's also another reason why it could have gotten cloudy, and that is because the light exposed to the gelatin photograph caused the gelatin to crack in combination with some of the other factors that we have here. All of these are mounted on a Homosote board. I saved the piece, which is going to go, give it to you guys, because otherwise it's going into the trash when I go home. But this is what they were on. And I'm sure it was chosen because of its rigidity and its lightweightness, and they didn't have too many choices back in the early 1950s as to how to deal with how to mount something like this. So this is what they would have used. And, it did its job, but it's not an archival material. Okay? So it too could have resulted in some of the damage to the pieces, particularly causing this sort of cracking to occur because it kept the object from expanding and contracting over the years. This told me that I could not put these objects or expose them to any water or moisture. If I did, I would probably have lost the image completely. And that is something I often do, is expose them. Use moisture to clean these up. This is here to show you that pattern I was talking about. This shows it up very well. Okay, so what about the treatment? Well, having been exposed to that environment all those years, they often had fly specks on them, and they had a lot of dirt. And so the first thing we did was to surface clean them with powdered erasers. You might want to use, a block eraser that like you find in the art store, but I think that would have been too aggressive and could have caused a lot of damage to the print. So instead, we used the powdered erasers, and that way I could control the pressure and how much I'm using on the object, and just to get the dirt off. And that was, here I am. And it did make a difference. This is not the original color of the erasers, okay? The erasers are like a beige color, a light beige color, an off-white. And you can see, you're like, well, it's picking up quite a bit of dirt in the process. Not surprising. And if I went at these with a swab or something like this, if I used any moisture, I could get color off. And I didn't want to do that, so that's why we limit how much moisture. This is the operation that really made Wynn wonder what in the world I was getting into when these were brought to me, because I told him I was going to split them off of the mount dry. And I do that with this tool. It's just a piece of Teflon, basically, and it's sharpened at one end. And you can go underneath, like I'm doing here, and I can split it right off of the mount. Here I am.
Here it was only glued around the edges?
No, the glue was all over it. Now, I forget what the question was that I was in the middle of answering. Was it mounted overall?
I was just wondering what, I worked for Right Impressions for many years.
Did you?
And I was wondering if that glue would attack the image.
I think I would be much more worried about the adhesive that was in the home soap than I
Yes,
would
that's what I was going to ask that as well.
in the glue that was used to adhere it. And I'm thankful that they used the glue that they did, because that helped, it wasn't permeated and I could easily get it off. If that had been PVA, white glue, Elmer's glue, for those of you who don't know, it might never have come off. It would probably been on there forever. So that's an aside. If any of you are doing family projects with your photographs or archives, don't use PVA. So this is the back, whence I got it off. And you can actually see kind of the brush strokes of the adhesive that they used. And then I basically scraped all that residue off, knowing that it was not a good quality material.
How long does that normally take for one of these size pictures? Because that looks like a very small tool.
For me to actually split it off the mount probably took no more than 30 minutes.
Okay. Wow. What about scraping off the?
Scraping took a lot longer. That probably took, I don't know, well, probably a couple days, but time-wise, maybe like 6 to 8 hours, something like that.
Wow.
And you know, you're using a sharp scalpel, so you have to be careful that you don't cut into the object. Which occasionally happens, and so that's why you'll see in a minute a lot of little adhesive places. I'll show you. So then I finished it off by sanding the area to get off, to clean off the adhesive and everything. So here's a before and after, so it does clean up quite a bit, right? And then there's a lot of little tears and things. Some of them, because of using the scalpel, you might just do a little tiny cut. So I put the adhesive in, which is wheat starch paste. It's like flour glue, basically, wheat starch paste, and let it dry and seal it back together. So that's your wheat starch paste right here, and then this is a setup to help it to dry and hold together.
Sir?
Yeah.
Is there, on Kansas, right?
No.
Oh, no.
No,
Both out
they were on that homicide that I showed you, and now, at this point, they're not on anything,
Okay.
just
so-
photographic paper.
Oh, okay.
That's all there is to it. So here's all there were tears in the object, you know, those scratches, they often resulted in tears, and so I'm mending all those things with the little strips of Japanese paper, that's what we use, a thin paper with wheat starch paste. And then there were those couple losses, so I made inserts. And here I'm making the insert with the tool. It's like a needle tool that I use to shape it. So here's the piece that's going to fit in here. And here's the piece that I use the needle with to shape it with, and it's going to go into that. And so there they are next to each other. And here they are going in. Now, they usually the best go in from the back. And so you're seeing me put it in from the back. Again, with the wheat starch paste. Let it dry. Put it on the weights. You can see the little bits of Japanese paper there, helping to hold it in place. And now I turned it over, and then you retouch it with watercolors, small brushes, to make it blend in to the rest of the object. So there it is. I don't know, it's after treatment, but it's partially done. And now I'm retouching those other areas, the scratches and some of the other areas of abrasion. Using that watercolor set, you see there. Yeah?
So how do you turn over, if you had to work on the front and the back, things of this size that are on just this little? See,
That can be intimidating if you haven't done it before, but for any of you that have done wallpapering, you get used to it. And you know, I've had enough experience that I know the strength of the object and how can that be handled or not. And this was strong enough that I could do that. Yeah.
So the original painting that was over the photograph was watercolor?
Yes.
Okay. So you're not really afraid of cracking the paint or anything
No.
when you flip it? Okay.
No. There's no paint per se, because watercolor is not paint really. It doesn't have that body to it. It's just it's more like a glaze because it's in water, and so you just put it on and it's kind of like a little stain. This one was a few years ago, so I'm not quite gray there. Well, the tricky part, and some of the longer parts, were when you get around to me remounting it. And so when we did the first one, maybe the first two, I was using, this is my paper, like this, strips like this, and using it as hinges around all the corners. And I'm switching adhesives here. Now I'm using adhesive called Vivid D8, which is an acrylic emulsion. And it's stronger and doesn't, I didn't want all of that moisture into my objects because that would cause it to curl and to bend, warp, and I didn't want to do that. So this, I can put it onto the strips, and then with the tacking iron, a little heat, I can apply it to my object. So this is what I used to begin with. Well, let me finish showing you what we did. So here it is, attaching it with the tacking iron on all the edges. And then it shows you with it all attached around the edges. I got it flipped over again, right? And now it's on the panel that I'm going to attach it to. So I'm putting it onto this. This is called an E-panel. And it's aluminum on two sides with like a honeycomb in the middle, a foam in the middle. That makes it lightweight, but very rigid. I was concerned about the weight because I knew we were going to be out of plexi, and then we have to move them after that, right? So this gives it a lot of rigidity. Now, what's the next picture? Let's see. So here I am tacking it down, both front, and I wrapped it around and back. So now it's laying in, this is where it's in the frame again, but this is me putting the plexi in position and taking off that paper that protects it from getting scratched. Sealing it all up inside the frame, and then the object back in the frame. Now, the interesting thing was that this paper is pretty strong, and the theory is that if the object expands and contracts, that this paper will tear before the object. When I returned it, the object was hung over a heat source, which is not ideal, but I understood why, and it caused the object in the winter to contract. And it contracted enough that that print tore in half, right across the center. And came back to me, and I repaired it. And as I just told Wynn, I had to go ask Wynn, I said, is that the one I repaired? Because I can't find the repair. So it worked pretty well. But as a result of that, we switched techniques, and I started using hinges like this. Now, what you can't see, and the reason I use the black, is that is where I have put little slits in the paper. So that, and it would be attached to the object here, and this would be going onto the panel. So that when it pulls, it releases easier. And that way, I figured that would help with the expansion and contraction of the object. And I mean, we haven't had any issues since, so it obviously has helped, at least to some extent. So, you said that we received the grant in 2014?
Yes.
So the treatment was actually completed in early 2015. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4 more since then. So I'm going to show them to you before and afters. Now the before and afters aren't going to look too dramatic here because the objects are too big. You can't see the little details showing you all the little mold spots that were removed and the fly specks that were removed and things like that. But they at least will show you something with them. So this was the second one treated, the East Hill Schoolhouse. This was completed in May of 2016. Did I get that? Is this the Overack? Oh, that's me. We're still in Overack. Okay. We'll get to the others. Here's some the details before and after. It's the only one I'm going to be showing you details of, so it's good to have your chance to look at them. Somehow, seeing that cloudiness now really does make me think that, yeah, they were probably coated in primer. There's the in-painting, some painting on the scratches here, and then getting rid of this here. The abrasions in the lower right. Which I said before, I'll say it's all done with watercolors. And the loss, one of the two losses that I filled.
Where did you receive your training?
Good question. University of Delaware. There are at least three, maybe four schools that teach art conservation. It's a master's degree program. And so University of Delaware is one. Buffalo State is another. I teach at Buffalo State still. The third one is NYU in New York City, New York University. And then there's one in Canada, Queens, in Kingston, Ontario.
What year did you graduate? What year did you graduate?
Oh, you want me to tell you?
I went to the University of Delaware as well.
I graduated, well, I was there as an undergraduate too.
Ah,
So I graduated as an undergraduate in '75
You're a lot younger than I.
and then graduated with my master's degree in conservation in '78. I just gave a presentation at one of our professional meetings talking about 50 years of photographic immersion. So that tells you how long I've been. That may be the most impressive before now. So here it is after treatment. And that's pretty accurate. This has the plexi on it, so I won't be able to do this again, I don't think. I mean, take a picture without glare because it's really hard with the plexi on it to do that. Now, I should just warn you, I think most of you know this, that plexi does scratch. So you have to be very careful when you clean it, otherwise you will make it cloudy over time. You know, of course, it's up there protected from being handled and touched and things. So somebody probably will have fingerprints on it at some time. You just have to be careful how you clean it. So this was the next time we treated. This would have been the East Hill Schoolhouse, which was completed in April of May 2016. I don't know if you can see it. I can see it from here. It's closer. There's a lot of that mold damage up in here. There's black, brown spots. And that's before treatment. And this is after treatment, where they're not gone, but they're much, much less noticeable than they were before. So this is the old brick school. No, sorry. What did I do? Go two?
Yeah, that is the Middlesex Old Brick School.
This is the old brick school?
Yep.
Okay, that's the right one. So this was finished in 2019. May of 2019. This is the round cobblestone schoolhouse. Finished in August of 2022. Sorry, this is before, is after. It's not, it's out of focus. I put this together, well, that one, I put into the slideshow yesterday, and I didn't have a chance to look at it before I sent it off, so it's out of focus. But you can see it after treatment. That was probably my favorite to treat, just because I love cobblestone buildings. And this is the Rushville High School, finished in August of 2024, so not quite a year ago. Do you mind if I tell you how much they all cost? Sure. Go ahead. Well, Wynn had to raise the funds, so he received five grants to do this, and it totaled $27,000. So we can thank him for I got pretty efficient at this by this fifth one. Now he just showed me the other one. That will not go into my basement. And as I told him, I actually plan on giving up treatment at the end of this year. I'll be treating some next year, but it'll be just finishing the projects that happen to come in. So, because my space needs to get used for other things. And I've been doing it long enough. It's time to retire a little bit. So that's all of them. Does anybody have any questions?
I just want to interject, because your audience may not be aware, is that when Jane painted these, the sky wasn't blue.
No.
She painted those, and there were no clouds. She painted all of the clouds, all of the trees. Many of these photographs were taken in the fall or early spring when there was no tree. She put in all of the leaves, she put in all the flowers. So Jane just didn't add color to these things. She actually painted into these things and gave them a sense of life that wasn't there before.
Yeah, you may, I didn't mention it, but these were black and white when they were first made. And so the color is all added. And very nicely done. Pretty effective. And look at them, they look pretty beautiful now. Behind the plexi really helps show them off too, just getting them clean and getting them behind the plexi. So the hope is now that they'll be accessible and used and appreciated for many, many years to come.
Gary, I have one comment. When Dan Rubes and I took the photographer's picture up to his house, Gary's there, he says, well, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to scrape this off the board. I think Dan and I both turned white. And we're driving back, we talked about it for about half an hour, and I said, I'm going to get a for sale sign. If he messes up at the iconic building in Middlesex, I'm just going to sell my house. That was kind of scary.
Yeah, well, that's the impression people that get that have never had conservation done before have all considered. You mean you wash this object in water? Yes, I do. But it was, I have to point out, it was made in water. These photographs, they were made in water. So if they haven't deteriorated too much, you should still be able to wash them. Don't try it on these, you would not have succeeded. But many photographs from even the 1800s, I can still wash in water and they're perfectly safe to do that. It's the only way you can treat some of them. If you're trying to remove stains and things, you do have to wash them in water. You have to use humidity to be able to do that. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Elaine Hilton, and she's speaking on Anson Wagner and Rushville High School.
We'll get some money.
Anson Wagner, who made it all happen.
I think so.
I wonder how
Well,
many of
maybe.
us remember walking in the halls of Middlesex Valley and seeing these large photos. There's a few. Yes.
What's that?
I've been asking my 1963 classmates, and there's a couple of them here, I think. Class of 62 is represented, and 64 and 65. What they remember about these pictures hanging in the walls, and people do have memories. Some of them can say, there was one by the cafeteria, there was one by the girls' locker room, and so forth. There was a dinner, we've heard some of this, I think, already. I'll try to condense what I'm saying. There was a dinner and open house in 1953 when the new wings of the cafeteria and the elementary, there's pictures of that in the yearbooks that we have here in the front of the building of those wings. And that's when that event was when Anson Wagner was there and presented the Murals. I was in the 2nd grade, and I remember it was exciting to have a brand-new classroom in that wing. And I do remember seeing these photos through the years, but I wouldn't have imagined how involved I'd become now, more than 70 years later, in celebrating their existence. Jim and I lived in other areas and came back to Middlesex in 2004, and then got involved in things here. Elias Wager settled on East Hill, which is where we live, on East Hill. Elias Wager settled on East Hill in the town of Middlesex in 1832, Elias Wager. Other members of his family had come to the area even earlier than that. As with many family names, alternate spellings may be found in records, and there are Wagers, A-R-S, and there's Wagers, E-R-S, and many of them descended from the early settlers. Are there any Wager family members here today? I don't see any. There were a couple that I thought might be here. But Anson Orlando Wager was born on November 28, 1879. He's the oldest child of James Herbert Wager and Elizabeth Cleveland Wager. Anson, like his father, attended the District 6 school on the corner of present-day Upper Hill Road and the Button Cross Road. The school was known by various names over the years, including East Hill, Chase, Wager, Robinson, and Wilson. Typically, schools were named for the trustee, and Anson's father, James Herbert Wager, served in that position. I wish that we had a diary or letters that belonged to Anson Wager so that we could know more about his interesting life. Thanks to the ability to look online in old newspaper accounts, I've learned some things about him. After his early education in the little school on East Hill, there, Anson received a preliminary regents certificate at the Rushville Union School. In 1895, he graduated from Penn Yan Academy in 1898, and then attended Yale University for a year. From there, he moved west to South Dakota, and later to Canada. He was married in South Dakota and later divorced. Eventually, he was employed by the Canadian Department of Labor in Ottawa for many years. Anson kept in touch with his Middlesex roots and often returned to see family members and friends. He contacted his former classmates at the school on East Hill, and a committee was formed to hold a reunion of students and teachers of that school, and that was in 1951. A dinner was held here in the town hall, and 3 photo murals were presented at that time. The, let's see, yeah, the little red school with the flagpole, and the one that we've just refound, and a big one of the Middlesex Valley School, which still stands. He presented them right here in the town hall. We have a display, I guess back by Amberley there is where that one is, a newspaper article that was written at that time. And there were students and former teachers that were present then. But, as I say, Anson wasn't finished with his grand ideas. 2 years later, in 1953, when the addition to the Middlesex Valley Central School had been completed, 400 guests attended a dinner in the new cafeteria with the Middlesex Chamber of Commerce as hosts. And Al Sisson, a noted radio personality from WHAM in Rochester, he was a speaker. And then Anson presented 7 murals. Keep counting up how many there are, or we've come up with different numbers, haven't we? In our press releases and everything. This event is documented in the 1953 school yearbook. We have 2 copies of that back here. The Genondagan, I think is, I was on the yearbook staff a couple of years, so we tried to remember how to say that word. We have to thank for those, the articles in the yearbook, Robert E. Moody, History and Yearbook Advisor. Anybody here study history with Robert E. Moody? Yes, yes. Mr. Moody. According to newspaper columns, Anson Wager made many trips from Ottawa to to this area as he arranged for these photos to be preserved in this special way. It must have taken a great deal of effort to secure the photos he desired, to arrange for their enlargement. We're still not sure exactly where that happened. Painting, framing them, and delivering them to the school from Ottawa. Well, he had his friends here who were, I guess, helpful with making that happen. And a year later, in 1954, he organized another reunion for students and teachers of the old brick school that was here in Middlesex Center. They had that lunch at the high school in a smaller room, I guess. Or it wasn't the high school, it was the central school. His mother, that was to honor the memory of his mother, who was, grew up here in Middlesex and went to that school. This photo was taken on Arbor Day in 1884, and this was they had a 70-year reunion in 1954. And several people were there who were in that picture, and they identified the people in the picture. We don't have a list of who those people were, unfortunately. There may be one somewhere. A few years ago, there was an article in the Adirondack Life magazine about, I've got a copy of it there, broom girl drills. And if you look in that picture, there's a bunch of young ladies in blue and white dresses with holding brooms. That was a thing back then. We wondered about them, and I did find in one of our scrapbooks a program from, I think I got that over there too, a couple years after this one. That was on the program. I can't say it right. Broom girl drills. It was like the color guard, the winter guard that we have now. Color guards. They did routines apparently, and they twirled their brooms, and I don't know. It was entertaining, along with singing and recitations. That's it, all in that program there. So Anson Wager died on May 21st, 1960, in Rockville, Ontario, Canada, and is buried there. We're glad to honor his dedication to his home community by his gifts that he made all those years ago. Moving right along, I want to speak about the Rushville High School mural, which is way back there. This is the latest one to be restored, so we're celebrating that today. I had to, well, yeah, there have been a lot of schools in Rushville. Suffice it to say that. A log structure, select school, a couple of schools were on Main Street near the Congregational Church. And that's all written up in Mr. Moody's book, America's First Rushville, if you want to know more about the schools in Rushville. I can't go into it, such length here. The Education Law of 1867 provided guidelines for the establishment of what were called union-free schools. And in 1868, voters approved a new school to be built on land purchased on Bassett Street in Rushville. That's the street that goes out by the library there. The brick was made locally, and stone for the foundation was quarried on a nearby farm. The total cost of that building and grounds was $15,000, 1868. As time went on, the school met the state requirements to become a high school in 1909. Well, that's a whole other subject of union schools and high schools and diplomas and how many courses they offered, but we can't go into that. But I did want to share that my mother, Sophia Voorhees Emerson, had attended the Round Stone Schoolhouse when she was little, because she lived right up the road. When the white frame, well, when the school burned, chimney fire, she was actually in Rushville with her family. They went there for the winter and lived near her grandfather. So she went to the Rushville school that year. She was 10 years old. When our daughter was 10, my mother wrote a book for her, a little booklet about her life on the farm and everything, and I just picked out a quote of her description of the big school. What a change for me at school. I was only used to one room and not more than 10 boys and girls. And here were 3 grades in one room, 4th, 5th, and 6th, there were probably 30 or 35 boys and girls. And she went on to describe that the teacher was different from her teacher at the one-room school. She was kind of loud and scary. And the stairway the whole thing was kind of scary. But, they returned to the farm, and she ended her schooling at the replacement of the round stone. And then she graduated from high school in 1927 from Rushville High. In the 1930s, the state education department urged centralization of schools, and it was a very contentious time for our school districts. There was a long line of voters in the Loomis Memorial Hall, which is still standing there, on September 21st, 1937. A proposition for centralization was carried by a vote of 446 to 442. So that was very emotional time, and people were involved. But that year, that was in September, schools proceeded as usual. They're separate schools, but and then they made plans to build a new school. The first graduations, the last graduations in 1938, Rushville High School, Middlesex High School. And then the next year, they didn't have a new school built yet. So the first through sixth grades came to Middlesex to school, junior high and high school, went to school in Rushville. And there were still 3 little rural schools that didn't close that year. The new school district's name was Central District Number 2. It took them a couple of years to decide on a name, Middlesex Valley. That was another, we don't want to give up our name. So the new school was finished, and they had graduation there in 1939, June. So the old Rushville High School was deeded to the Grange organization, an agricultural fraternity, and used for their meetings and special events and some community groups. There was a juvenile Grange group, which I believe some people who are here today attended. You're back there. Who attended the Grange? Jeannie did, and Sandra did.
I remember that building when I attended Grange there.
Yeah,
Us Bagley kids were members.
yeah.
That had a beautiful stairway.
There's a
And
picture of it
wonderful-
here, yeah.
a wonderful guardrail-like thing that you could slide down on.
I read something.
It was a good education.
Amanda Bishop, the Rushville historian, put something on Facebook, put pictures of that school, and asked for responses and memories, and we got several.
That was a common.
I was looking
thing
at
that
something
people
about a toboggan.
remember sliding down
Yeah.
the stairwell.
Something about kids, well,
When they, after it was closed, is the great check continued to happen.
yeah, there's a place to go exploring, apparently, and kids always want to go see something where they're not supposed to be. Like, don't go in that school. The Grange was there until their membership was declining, and the original agreement was that it would revert to the village of Rushville if there was no more Grange. So that's what happened, and it reverted to the village in 1961. It was in poor condition, finally demolished in 1974 to the regret of many. Homes were built at the site. There's still some houses there. Okay. We have a few pictures of the interior of the school that are back there. And I have my trip. Oh,
Get your brick.
I got my brick. As I've been saying, I don't think my children know about this, and probably aren't going to want it. Most aren't going to want it. But my mother received this brick from the school. And we were talking yesterday. I said, I want to find where this brick was in that picture. I think Amberly found it. She did. Yeah. It's that brick. I have this memorandum. It's RHS, which I'm not even sure my children would know what that, Rushville High School. And she's got the dates, 1868, and when it was built, 1927 when she graduated, and 1938 when it closed. So that's pretty special, it's pretty heavy. One more thing I wanted to say was my cousin, Ruth Clark, mother of Barbara Dunham, who's here, she was a town historian for many years, and she was the driving force, I believe, behind saving these pictures. They were taken off the walls in the school. I'm not sure why that happened, but they were put in storage. And she rescued them, she and others. She refinished the frames. I guess at one point, I'm not sure what they were originally. Maybe black, maybe in the pictures in the yearbook, you can sort of see. But then they were painted that blue at some point. I assume they were, I don't know if they were all blue. Do you know, Barbara, when she refinished them? Well, whatever, she refinished them, and they were lovely, but the condition of the pictures was still not good. And so Dan Robeson followed her as town historian, and he learned about the grants, and then Wynn wrote the grants, and Gary beautifully restored them. It's amazing how he did that. So we're grateful to all of them, of course. And I wanted to thank, yesterday we moved these here thanks to Christopher and Neil from Village of Rushville, and Bob Mincer got us in here, and Wynn and Ed Bronson helped with that. Jim Hilton and Amanda and Joe and Amberly Kelly were all here. And we thank the fire company too, of course. And that's it.
I want to mention a couple things about the school. That brick, of course, is a local brick made in Rushville. The place where that was made was part of the land on Town Line Road, right across from the Middlesex Valley building, where all of the dirt for all of the bricks was made. And that includes the Congregational Church that was there. That was all original Rushville bricks. That's something a lot of people don't realize.
Next up, we have Mr. Ken Poole, who has just recently also been appointed as the new Naples historian. So excited to see you.
It's just the arrow?
Yeah.
Hi. In 1975, I moved to Naples from Wilmington, Delaware. And I had come here to be the program director of the Naples Middle School, which was the art school that was located in Naples. And I bought a real fixer-upper on Reed Street that and I lived there for 30 years. And in this room is my old next-door neighbor, Jean Peck. And she lived on one side of me, and Jane Loomis lived on the other. Now, when I met Jane, she was not an outgoing, gregarious person. She was very inward to herself. But we had a couple driveway conversations, as you might have with a neighbor. And she mentioned she had done a painting at the high school, and one of those days I wandered over and saw it, and I was really impressed. And then I was really impressed when I realized she did this as a junior in high school. And I got, you know, I was stunned, to tell you the truth, because I was a former high school art teacher, and I knew what was capable, and these guys, it was just amazing. Oh, and I also want to mention that when I worked here in town, Bob Mincer and I used to work together. So, you know, it's amazing how you come to a thing like this, and there's all these connections. So anyway, years go by, a lot of years go by, and in Naples is a historical society, and they published something that I think was published by Wynn, and that was the Potter School, the old stone school. And I said, what a minute, that was my next door neighbor that painted that. So I started looking around, and there wasn't much information on her, you know. So I said, this is a story I need to tell. And it turned out to be a much bigger story than I ever could have imagined. And I'm going to take you through that story. because I'm you never stop, I'm a genealogist. And the story behind families is often more interesting than the work they did. And Jane Loomis was no exception. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing right off the top. Jane Loomis was an identical twin. And and her twin sister, and I'm going to go through this later, but it's an interesting story. So here we'll start. This on the board is her mother. And she was the 12th daughter of farmers who lived in Cardiff, New York. Now, all you historians, what was also in Cardiff?
The giant.
The Cardiff Giant. So that little fiasco, you know, helped to build Cardiff into a reasonable sized town. For years, it's about 11 miles south of Syracuse. And so hotels sprung up, restaurants sprung up, and people came to Cardiff to visit the Cardiff Giant. So, being the 12th girl, 12th kid in the family, I think she was essentially feral. She had parents and then they were exhausted. They were farmers and so she grew, I can't find if she graduated from high school, but I can tell you this, if I do this right. Wrong button. This is embarrassing. Which button should it do? Oh, this arrow, these arrows. Okay. This is where she went to school. This is Lafayette School in Cardiff, New York. And there's our girl Jane. And in that class, and they're weaving baskets. It took me a while to figure out what they were doing. And in that classroom about her 2 brothers and a sister. So they were all in the same school. Years later, this is Jane at the age 29. Between these 2 pictures, an enormous amount happened. But here she is with 3 of her sisters. A pretty glamorous lot at the time, you know. So, I'll go back to this. She was born, and her mother couldn't take care of twins. Her mother had a relationship with the guy next door. When she moved to Syracuse, and she was 23. I mean, she wasn't a kid. She moved to Syracuse to work. She worked in a retail store. The guy next door worked in a retail store. They got together. They had these twins. He wasn't into it. In fact, 6 months later, he married another woman. And they were shipped off to Onondaga Children's Home. Now, this is where you gotta love New York State. So I go looking for Jane's birth certificate and her records there. Well, because she was adopted, I couldn't get them. But her twin sister was fostered. So therefore, her records were available. So just it's the same record. One has Jane's name, one has Betty's name in it, but one I could get and one I couldn't get. So this is the original record for Betty. And this is Jane in 1930. The Loomis family, who had come from this area. Jim Loomis, who lived out here on, I think on Loomis Road, but I'm not sure. I can't find the farm.
Oh, you can't?
Is it the old house about a mile in?
I think there was a house in Reston maybe, but I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I really need that information because I've wandered around out there and you can't tell. But as you go out Loomis Road, you go across the road and maybe half a mile, and there's an 1880s house sitting on the left.
That's right.
And is that house the Loomis house?
That whole area is the Loomis farm.
So that house must be the original house.
It is.
Because it's not, nobody lives in it now, but you can see where new houses have been built around it.
Well, I think it's Mennonite.
No wonder they didn't answer the door.
The Loomis is still owned where Jim lived right now.
Yeah, okay. Well, his son Glenn, all right, worked on the farm. Now Glenn had a physical disability. He had a short left leg. It was like Chester on Matt Dillon, you know, Mark. And so he didn't want to stay in farming. And when his father died, he sold the farm. parts of it, or part that he was using. And he moved into Naples. And with that money, he bought a gas station, and then he bought next to the St. Januarius Church, where the prisoner of war camp used to be. There's a building still there, and he owned that station there, which was an oil distribution center, and he did really well there. So this is Jane as she was growing up in Naples. One of the things you have to be really thankful for, when I was doing research on Betty, the school where she lived, in the 40s, during the war, they didn't publish a yearbook. Because Naples did. Thank God. And it really came to me when I was doing this, that you lose so much history when a town doesn't publish a yearbook. And so for 4 years, you know, where she lived, in Manoa, there is no yearbook, so nothing. You know, you can find nothing about it. So her sister basically disappeared off the face of the earth for those 4 years, where Jane had a tremendous, you know, representation. So, she was lucky. I'm going to tell you right now, she was lucky. When the Bertha and Jim Loomis adopted her, they supported her. They took her to church, and since she was born in church, they brought art supplies to church, and she sat there. Back then, ministers were sort of unregulated; they just go on for a long time. And she would color and do things in church, and that started her art career. She got really interested in art. It went on. Her art became better and better. Her art was in the Sibley Lindsay. Remember, Sibley had a big art show every year? Well, her work was accepted into that show, and then went on to Carnegie Mellon, where it had national exposure. And then, based on that, she went to Syracuse University, where she graduated magna cum laude in art in 1944. I talk about this all the time. Imagine your parents in 1944. There's a war going on, all right? And your daughter says, "Dad, I want to go to Syracuse and major in painting." God bless them. You know, because a lot of parents might have said no. Betty, for example, ended up working in Liverpool at the General Electric plant, putting TV tubes together. So that was the difference between one family and the other. Picture of Jane right here. She's right here. I showed this picture of Naples because every name in there on the bottom is a recognizable name in Naples. But it brings up something about Jane that I often say. She's always in the back row. You know, she's like always, "Don't talk to me." You know, but I'm here, but I'm not talking. You know, she's always in the back row because she's a little taller, I think, than we realize. This is Naples when she lived there. And I always like to show these kinds of pictures because in our heads, it's hard to imagine the environment these people lived in. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not the Naples we know today. So I like to show this, you know. And when I moved to Naples, it wasn't much different. Here's Sun Spoon right here. Here was the post office right there. And the Naples department store was right there. So,
Where is the moving house?
moving house is right here. Okay, right back here.
Naples Hotel.
Naples Hotel's on the
Yeah.
same side.
Fair House, furnitures.
Home and work. This is where she lived on the right. The house has been turned since she lived there. It used to face the other way, but the people bought it turning so that they'd have a side yard. But this was the gas station her father owned. And I call it home and work because I'm pretty sure she hung out there and did odd jobs with them. But this is where she got her studios, I call it. The church where she colored in the pews. And then she was lucky. Naples had just expanded. And they had an art room. They had theater. They had gym. They had all these things that the poor kids who came there before they didn't have. And she had a great art teacher. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Here are some of her illustrations in the yearbook. Now, what's interesting about this, these are scratch boards. I looked in all the yearbooks before her and after her. The drawings are all okay, you know, typical kid stuff, but her stuff is outstanding. And this is when she was a junior in high school, because that's when you start doing the work for the yearbook, because you're not going to be around the next year. And then she did this painting. Okay. Now, this painting is the size of these photographs, and it hangs in the front hall of the Naples school. She had an art teacher, and we're going to talk about her in a second, for some reason, who was just there for 2 years. And her gig was mural painting. And so every school she taught in thereafter, there was a mural painting. She just got a hold of the right person at the right time, made sure she had all the work. I talked to her daughter, and her daughter says, not only that, but her mother probably made her do 20 sketches of what she was going to paint. She was very, very adamant of planning the thing out, and she did this painting. And it got national recognition. I mean, she was, the newspapers came down and did articles. You know, they have these, here it is hanging in the front hall, she's painting. 16-year-old Naples Central School painter. Now, Ruth Ketch is the art teacher. Nobody remembers her because she's only there for 2 years. But she was from Cohocton. She came from a large farming family in Cohocton. And she got an art degree, and she never really was what I would call a practicing artist. She did artwork, but she was a great teacher. And she would go from small town to small town trying to land a permanent job, because remember, this is 1940s. There weren't a lot of art jobs. And she'd rent a room in town and, you know, and stay there. And this is what she did here for 2 years. But she got a hold of Jane and made sure that she got the best of everything. So, this is the important part I've added to the show. I was trying to say, who influenced Jane? Well, here's Ruth Ketch. Studied art for Fredonia, taught many schools, and she ended up in Haverling and Bath, where she taught our select. Had one child, specialized in murals. Ira Randall. Now, some of you would know Ira Randall. But Ira Randall was probably, and come back in a year, I'll have a show on him. Ira Randall was the most prolific artist that Naples has ever seen. Hundreds of paintings he cranked out. I mean, he was very, very good, very prolific, and he was, not only that, he was one of the sweetest men you could ever met. When I met him, I was 29, he was 72. You know, he was 6 years younger than I am now. And I thought he was old then, you know. But he was a great guy. And he was a Renaissance man. Not only was he a painter, he was an illustrator, he did antiques, he was the Boy Scout leader, he was the Cub Scout leader. Wonderful man. And in his career in Wayland, working at the croffery, and they made wooden bowls and baskets. And he was the art director, and he had a lot of women working for him and showed him how to paint those baskets. But here are some of his work. He painted a lot of houses because that was the major form of commissions back then. People would pay you to paint their house. So he painted houses, Naples scenes, you know, ocean scenes. He would load up the car at any given moment. He kept his kit in the back of the trunk, and they would drive to New England. And his granddaughter said she would go with him, and he would paint covered bridges and all those kind of New England scenes. Also, he painted signs. This is how he made a living. And those from Naples will recognize these signs. Paul Miller on the right, the Naples Library on the left. Now, Rob Roy Converse. Now, here's a character. Graduated from Yale University. He was an architect in Rochester. Retired to Naples in 1932, but still worked as an architect in Rochester. But he became a painter. Because back then, if you were an architect, and I can say this, my son's an architect, You took all the art classes because there were no computers back then. You had to be able to do a watercolor. You had to be able to draw because you had to be able to present your ideas. He was in town, and he was sort of the wild artist type at the time. He would do things like, Doc Abraham, of course. He had a greenhouse in town. And he would order flowers for women and have them sent to them, and they would show up on his porch, and the husband would not answer the door. But he was a character, and he was an influence. And he did paintings, classic paintings of Naples. And on the right is Kitty Abraham, Doc Abraham's wife, in their greenhouse. Katie Abraham. Anna Warren. Anna Warren was her sister-in-law. And Anna Warren was very outgoing, great person. In fact, I tell the story, I met Anna Warren and I met Jane the same time. Anna Warren used to come to the Naples Middle School, go to the square dances, take classes, be part of the scene, where we never saw Jane Loomis once the whole time. But Anna did these, and she would not, these classic little, what I call Sunday painter kinds of paintings. And this one over here, I think she took off a postcard and painted that. But she was a reasonable painter for the time. And they would sit, they lived next door to one another, and they would sit out in the backyard and they would exchange art tips and brushes and stuff. And they were great friends. And then here we have Jane again. She went to Syracuse University, graduated in '49. You see her with a friend of hers, I don't know who the woman is, but graduated magna cum laude from the school. Moved back to Naples in 1950 or 1949, and this is the first painting she ever did of Naples. It's this big. This is about 4 by 5 inches. But 4 or 5 inches, it's got a tremendous amount of volume in it. Look at that. Clear view all the way back. I mean, it's just a terrific little painting. And it was a foreteller of what she would do. One of the things that Jane always did, she always wrote on the back where the painting was from. If you have a painting that says Jane Loomis on it, that's before she was married. If it says Jane Loomis Gould, after she was married. And even though she didn't remain married, she kept the name Gould and used it on the back of her paintings the rest of her life. This painting, we always thought, until last week, was painted when she came back. But it wasn't. This was painted in her senior year in high school. A guy in Rochester found it in a bin and bought it for $5 and sent me an email at the Historical Society. I got this painting. Do you know who this woman is? Because on the back was a shipping card, and it had her name and where she went to school. And the price was $5 then. And this was put in the Sibley show as well. And it's done with temper paints, the kind of paint you use in elementary school, and that's what she used for this painting. I'm trying to buy it for the guy, but he won't give it up. So, years go by, and she marries a guy named Gould, and George Gould, and moves to Greece. It was not a happy marriage. And they had a lot of fights, and it just was bad news. And she came back to Naples in about 1970, and she lived with her mother. And this is one of the first paintings she did of the Williams farm. And as you said, all the people are listed, and even Jane is right here in the painting. But here again, this is where Jane started to showing her art chops. She took that valley and moved it because the mountain was not, perspective wasn't correct. So she changed the direction of the mountain, changed a couple of houses, and made the whole thing fit. And by putting the barn right in the middle, it gave your eye a chance to go around the painting. And then she populated it. Now, one of the things I always liked about Jane's paintings, and I had to get over my own biases at first, was she made these beautiful sort of what I call landscapes. And then she populated them with people and things and animals and hot. And at first I thought it was kind of kitschy. but for the time, it was terrific, you know. So on the back of these paintings is a list of all the people who were in the painting. And it's just been so helpful from a historical point of view.
Did you say she moved in with her mother?
Yes.
I was wondering if she ever connected with her mother again.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I'm sorry, her stepmother, Bertha Warren.
Okay.
Bertha Warren.
Okay.
Okay, good question, and good Bertha Warren. Now, here is a challenge for you. I do not have a picture of Bertha or Glenn. And I have searched everywhere. And here was a woman everyone knew her in town. Everyone knew Glenn, because even though he was a taciturn, quiet kind of guy, but they all knew him. He was a very successful businessman. We can't find a picture. So, if you find one, please call me, you know. But this is the painting that I have back there. Now, no one knew this painting existed except for Jake Makepeace. And why did he know? Because Jake Makepeace was the director of Whitmer's for many years. And when he retired, they said to him, when Hazlitt's bought it, Hazlitt didn't know the local history, they said, Jake, what do you want out of your office? And he said, that. And he took that painting and he lent it to me for the show. And otherwise, we would have probably, who knows what would have happened to it when Hazlitt took over. They might have kept it, but we would have known it was there. She got married. George Gould seemed like the ideal guy. He was tall, fair. He was an art teacher in Pressburg and in Naples, and that's how she met him. And I talk about it as friends. All right, it's 1952. It's Naples. You're an artist. Who's hanging around Naples then? A bunch of farmers. I mean, God bless them. We eat from them, but they weren't her kind of people, you know. But she met this guy, George Gould, and he seemed like the right kind of guy, you know. And isn't that funny? I'm missing a picture. So she marries him, and they move off to Ladder Road up in Greece. This is a plein air picture on cardboard. We found this in Verhoe's back. It was on cardboard. She'd probably gone out, painted it as a sketch, brought it home, and then we were able to find the final picture. And this is how she took that sketch and then transferred it into the whole landscape.
And that's Vine Valley?
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Look at that.
right down the lake.
Bear Hill. It's Bear Hill.
Vine Valley?
Oh, that's Vine Valley on the right, sure,
Yeah.
yes. And you can see, Bear Hill right there on the right.
Yeah.
And Cook's Point, she did this for the Hawks family. When she came back to Naples, Katie Hawks knew her situation and kept her really busy. She painted every kid's portrait. She did paintings for the family, paintings. All the Hawks have a big Jane Loomis over the couch. That's where most of these paintings end up, over a couch, because they're so big, people don't have room for them in their normal living space. That's the other thing that differentiated Jane from all the paintings around her. Ira Randall was painting at the time, but his paintings were all 24 by 30 inches at the most. Jane was working on a whole different scale. Brian Glenn, looking south. I mean, it's a big painting. It took a lot to paint something like this. I would imagine there are 3 or 4 months' work into a painting this size, at the least. Booth Arnold's Cafe, which is burned down and now no longer there. But here again, she listed all the people sitting in front of Booth Arnold's. I got a great story about Booth Arnold's Cafe that I'll tell you. Booth Arnold ran this bar, and on the second floor he had bedrooms, which was basically a flop house. And guys would get drunk and they would go up there and sleep it off. But once in a while they have a buckboard sitting out front. So he just throw them in the buckboard, slap the horse, and the horse would take him home. It was the original Uber driver. This is, I think, one of the finest paintings that Jane ever did. This is rock cut coming up the hill. It's a perfect painting. Yeah, out of Woodville. It's a perfect painting. No people, nothing major to look at. you know, except it's just done so well. It's a small painting, it's only this big. I've been trying to buy it for 2 years. Vicky Grove owns it, she won't sell it to me. She's waiting for me to go out and do all these talks and drive the price up. But during that time, the newspapers had time and space. She got a lot of press. I mean, she had paintings in Rochester where they did articles on her, announcements of her paintings. Then she did portraits. She was the go-to portrait painter of the area. And this is all Canandaigua. Judge John Cooney, he died on the bench, and nobody expected him to die. He was too young. And back then, if you were a judge at the courthouse, if you ever go to the courthouse, and I hope you don't have to, this line with paintings of these guys in black, you know, with their head. That's all you see. And they all had to buy their own painting because it was against the law to have the county buy your painting for you. So when the judge died, they hired her from photographs and stuff to do a painting. So you go into the courthouse, paintings up there on the wall, and you go, all these paintings of guys in black, and there he is in a brown suit. So it's almost refreshingly modern for the time. Harlan Doc Evans on the right, Evans Field in Canandaigua. He was the athletic director and principal of the school, and she was commissioned to do his painting as well. And big article about the event. Now, this is the mystery. This is the other thing that Middlesex and I share together. This is Arthur Caswell Parker. You all know who he is?
Yeah.
One of the most important people to ever live in this area when it comes to history. He was the director of the Rochester Museum of Science Center, and he was also the most knowledgeable person in New York State on the Seneca Indian. In fact, he was part Seneca Indian. And this is not a painting of him, this is a photograph. In the newspaper article, it lists the paintings she had done, and it lists this painting as one of them, or this image. I show this because this is what he would have looked like at the time in 1953. Jane and his daughter went to Naples High School together, and I'm pretty sure that was the connection. I have called every museum, every Indian concern, anybody who had the least possibility of having this painting, nobody can find it. So I show this to you because you never know. You walk into somebody's house and there it is hanging on the wall. Because paintings tend to get hung up and then you forget about it. You know, you go, oh, yeah, who's that? We don't know, but we just had the painting. So if you find this painting, please give me a call. Everybody wants it. And I'm going to do a whole thing on Parker. Remarkable man, what he did in his life. We were talking about somebody who was born in 1878 earlier.
Anson
Anson.
Wager.
He was born in 1881. I bring this up because we forget, 1881 seems like a long time ago, and he lived to 1955. Whoops, itchy finger. Great guy. Lived on Parish Road. And if you go up Parish Road to this day, when he moved here in 1930, he bought this run-down cabin that sat looking over the lake. Because as part Seneca Indian himself, he was convinced the Seneca Indians came out of the gorge and that this was the birthplace of the Seneca Nation. He was convinced. I don't know if he's right or not. But, so he built this house, or he bought this house because it looked over the whole valley. And he lived there with his wife and his daughter. And she lived there until she died in 2000 something. And even at the very end, they were still using an outhouse. I mean, they never really updated it. And I go up there, and it was dirt road for most of the time I spent in Naples. And I cannot imagine how his daughter must have walked down that hill every morning to take the school bus into town and walked up that hill every night.
There's a bench there now, Ken.
Fence where?
At his house. There's a sign, a little parking area.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of, and there's a couple signs there that talk about his life, and you get a sense of how, I walked the whole property, and I found a few, you know, things that said there were things here, but you know, the house is gone, everything's gone.
I remember my father pointing that house out
What road is that?
where Arthur, the South Parish
Yeah.
Hill.
He commuted to Rochester during the week. He was a weekend father.
Yeah.
All right, it's 1933.
Mr. Modi.
I get to bring this up. It's 1933, 1935. Think of the cars you had back then. And think of the cars, those cars driving to Rochester in the winter on the roads they had back then. These modern roads didn't exist. They were all twisty, turning little roads that went all the way probably up the west side of the lake, and they turned and probably took 5 and 20 in, and then 15 up, and you know, the thruway wasn't there then. So it was pretty remarkable, but he did a wonderful job at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. Here's how that all worked. He's sitting at his desk at the old Rochester Science Center, which was out in Edgerton Park. It's 1929. He had the job for like 5 years. Bausch walks in and says to him, "Show me your plans for the new museum." He had never said that he was going to build a new museum. But he opened his drawer, pulled out the plans, and said, "Here it is." And Bausch says, "Boy, it looks good to me. Build it. I'll pay for it." And he paid for it and gave him that whole estate that the Museum and Science Center is sitting on. That used to be Dr. Bausch's home. And the houses, he gave him the houses, he gave him everything. And that's how that all started. So, she had what I call gig jobs. Every fall, and around September, she would put in the Naples Record. Need a perfect Christmas gift? Think about a picture of your child. And little ads. And she would get these little ads. Here's her son, George Gould, and Mary Hawks. And she'd do these little portraits. And then she'd do local pets. The dog at the right is Lucky. That dog hung out at the high school for like 10 years. He was just part of the high school. I don't think anybody knew where he went at night. But everybody knew him, and she did a painting of him. So, it's 1955. This is a photo I had to restore. It was so fly-specked and so, from an old newspaper. She's at the top of her game. She's got major commissions. She's got all the judges in town. She's done big landscapes. Things are going really well for her. She's married, no children. You know, she's really doing well. Life seemed good. She did the photo mural project right before that. And it was this painting that got me involved in this whole project. Or this, I should say, over-painting, not painting. I will go through these again. She did illustrations and Christmas cards and all kinds of little odds and ends for people in the village, or at the time of Naples. 1961. Her husband gets the great idea of adopting a child. So they adopted George, and then 3 months later, they got another one. So she has 2 kids. Here was a woman that I don't even think ever babysat. You know, I don't think she had no sisters, no girls in her family, and all of a sudden, she has 2 kids. Now, look at her there. All right. It's not going back. I don't know where I'm doing wrong. Oh. Look at her here. Exhausted. Exhausted. You know, she had been offered a job in Naples to teach at the elementary school. She taught for 6 weeks and said no. She couldn't deal with the kids, and she said, "I'm a painter, I'm not a teacher." And she was never cut out to be a mother. Never. She should have never been a mother. You know, she should never marry George Gould. She should have walked away from that, you know, in a moment. But here she is, and here's Jay on the right, and her brother. Her brother died just 2 years ago. She went through a Norman Rockwell period where she did all these paintings. Norman Rockwell, back in the 50s, he was the influence, you know, in the painting scene, unless you were a college kid, and then you were looking at Jackson Pollock and Franz Klein and all those people, but she was never an abstract expressionist. Now, this is her daughter. Her daughter, when she was 5 years old, her father kicked her mother out of the house and said, "Get out of here. Take your car and go, and never come back." And she did. She left, went to Naples. Fortunately, she had a place to go. And he said to her kids, "You'll never see your mother again." I mean, it's unbelievably cruel. And she didn't. She didn't see her mother again until she was in high school. And and then only once or twice. And it wasn't until college that she really had an understanding of who her mother was. And so I'm going to read this for you because it's really important. I want to share that I think my mother was happiest when living in Naples. While the vast majority of my memories with her are extremely difficult, most of my fondest memories are visiting her and my grandmother Bertha Warren, who is on 23 Reed Street. It was on Reed Street that Mother talked to me about going to Syracuse University and thinking I wanted to go there. I remember looking at her wedding pictures and thinking how beautiful she was. This was quite an expression from a woman who really sort of hated her mother. You know, and her mother was a crackpot. I mean, if it had thunderstorms, all the kids had to get into the bed. You know, she was afraid the thunderstorm was going to knock them all out. You know, she had very, very extreme views on things. Jennifer, who I found, took me a long time to find her, who was a psychiatrist, right out there with her mother. So here she is towards the end of her life. Okay, she died in 2000. She got Parkinson's disease. It was a long-term Parkinson's where she lost the ability to paint finely because she had a little tremor. So she gave all of her paints, all of her brushes to Anna Warren and said, "I'm done." And for the next 30 years, it's about the next 25 years, she adopted kids through a church in Ingleside, and she would support them. When her father died, in Middlesex, by the way, in a car accident. How many people have died in Middlesex in a car accident? When he died, and her mother died, she inherited $200,000. A lot of money back then. I mean, none of us would mind getting a check for $200,000 today, but she lived off that money for the rest of her life. Plus, her husband had to pay alimony. He paid it every week because he told his daughter, "I don't want her ever to get one too many checks." Yeah. So if she died, he was afraid the check would be already out there, so he would pay her every week. But she adopted these kids, she supported them, supported their kids, sometimes sent them to college, and the only deal was she had to get a letter from every one of them every month. And if she didn't get a letter, she would cut the funding. So she ran a tough deal. Now, I bring this up. In 1975, Judy Reifsnyder, who was Judy Billheimer at the time, moved into Naples. She is the next Jane Lewis. And you can buy her work because it's out there and it's not expensive. You can't find Jane Lewis's anymore. For all of her work, I bet she did less than 50 paintings. Where Judy has done at least that many, and she's still alive and still painting. And she lives in Naples, and you can find her on the internet. And this is her, one of her bigger painters. And she, like Jane, goes to art stores, art shows, wins first prize, gets commissions. It's the exact same story. So, that's my story on Jane Lewis. Because this is a history thing, I never feel like it's over. You know, I'm always getting last bits of information, which is why I've changed this into a PowerPoint presentation, because I can change it easily. You know, I don't have to rewrite the whole book. And so, do you have any questions that I can sort of... Yes?
From your art background, would you say her art evolved at all over the years, or did she refine or change?
You know, that's a really good question. I would say she got better at doing what she did. But did she change as an artist? Not really. You know, she sort of came out with a basic skill set, and she did that skill set the rest of her life, you know. But she only painted 20 years. You know, she gave up painting when most painters are reaching full stride. And then she was done.
Did you say that last lady you showed was an heir?
Heir in the sense that she took over the women artists in Naples. You know, there haven't been many women artists in Naples. There have been a few what I call Sunday painters, people who paint it. But to be full-blown, make my life, you know, making art, Judy is the next one.
I have always marveled at these pictures of how touchy she was in getting it right. Now that one in Rushville, I sat there at the history room every Tuesday and just looked at that picture. And I know it's black and white, and to have them painted just like they were that way when they were taken has always made me feel she was so technical.
That perfectionist ability about her carried over into her later years. And when she lived up on the hill, and she had local kids like Vicky Grove would come in and take care of her at night. And she was a pain in the ass to work with, you know. She was a perfectionist, she was picky on these kids, and that little perfectionist drive in her just drove everybody away, to tell you the truth. And even at the end, she didn't even call her kids by their name, she called them the kids, you know. She was difficult, very difficult person. But she had a talent, she used that talent, and she left behind a good body of work, and she left behind a lot of kids who got a chance they never would have had before. All in all, not a bad life. Now, her twin sister is a whole other story, and it's in my book, which is right here. This is the book on Jane Loomis, but a third of the book is on her sister Betty, who had a wild life as well, and was an identical twin sister, and had none of the benefits that Jane had, but at the end of her life, she became a painter. And painted horses, because she was always a horse. She was always dealing with horses, and she started painting horses, you know. But yes.
Did the two of them ever connect again after?
Yes, good question, and I'm glad you brought that up. I always forget that whole thing. Yes, they did. When she was about 40, they met for the first time. And the only reason I know that is because Jennifer said that they all went to meet her and met her son. And that was the first time her mother had met her as well. They had forgotten about one another. They were 3 when they were pulled apart, you know. They didn't know, you know. Anything else? I got about 2 more of these presentations in me, and I think my Jane period's over. This is the 5th one I've done, and then I'm working on Ira Randall. And this summer, at the South Bristol Grange Hall, we're having a retrospective of Ira Randall's work, and I'll be doing a presentation on his life as well. And I got to tell you, it's a good thing I'm doing these things, because everyone who knew Ira Randall is now in their late 80s and 90s. And we're losing these people left and right, and it's really important to get this stuff down, you know. So.
A lot of the Standishes knew Ira Randall.
Standishes?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But you know, Ira, he lived for a good long time. He died in 1985. He was born in 1905. I'm sorry, 1985. He was born in, so he lived to be 8 years old, and he painted all those years. I mean, he just kept painting and painting and painting. So there's a lot of work around of his. But Jane was a different story. You know, I think she painted only if she could sell it, because she was making her living by painting. You know, Ira taught in Naples for 30 years, so he had a job. You know, he could actually support himself. Anything else I can? And look, if you find anything, call your local historian and say, who was that guy who gave a talk? I got something for him, you know, because I'm always looking. Like the Loomis missing thing. I really want to get the Loomis house, and I want to get a picture of Glenn, and Bertha. It's a major part of my story that's missing. All right.
Don and I are gonna delve into that.
All right, great. Well, you know, because if we don't do it, it'll never get done.
You can go to the Lucas themselves, because.
Well, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start knocking on doors out there. Thank you very much.
Okay, on the closing act. First of all, I'd like to thank the two young ladies for being here. You break the average age here by 50 years probably.
They said they were gonna do that, they're like, I guess we'll go, we'll be the others.
We really appreciate you showing up. This youth is always good. Okay, so I got a little advertising here. You know, this is a great presentation. First of all, I'd like to recognize Amberly for having done this. I mean, she put this all together herself, so let's give her a nice round of applause. It's their first event, and as you can tell, the Middlesex age group, our average age is probably 75. Amberly broke that average, as you young ladies did, by half, actually. Right, half? More than half, actually. Anyway, this is part of the advertisement. If you like this presentation, you can become a member of the Middlesex Heritage Group for $10. Today, $10 you become a member. With that membership, you get a newsletter, quarterly newsletter, which if you stop in on Wednesday mornings, we have some great articles. Deb Bronson puts that together. It's a great presentation, always informative, and I think you'll enjoy it. We have a YouTube channel. It's called the Middlesex Heritage Group. This presentation will be on the YouTube channel. We have about 8 or 9 videos there right now. We do put them up there. We have a Facebook page, Middlesex Heritage Group. I cleverly named all those. Wednesday mornings we volunteer. We meet there from 9 to 12. We catalog, we record, we sit around and talk. And at 10 o'clock, we have coffee and homemade cookies. So, if you don't want to be a member, or if you don't want to volunteer, just stop in and see us. We have family histories of thousands of people probably from the area here. You can check in, just check your family history, see if we have all the information that you have, or we may have information you don't have, and we can exchange, reflecting the history, family history is updated. I can't go without saying, if you want to read about Middlesex, you have to read Ruth Clark's book, Histories and Legends of Middlesex. It is really the Bible of the history of Middlesex, and if you become a member for $10, which is a whole year of $10, we usually sell the book for $25. You get it for $20. That alone should entice you to be a member. All right, let's see here. Again, I learned some things today. I didn't realize we'd gotten $27,000 from the Greater Hudson Heritage Network. When Dan Robertson brought that idea up, I thought, I'd never written a request for a grant before, but those people are so easy to work with, and I think we're going to have a little problem with that last one for a variety of reasons. Get somebody to repair it, and then we're looking for somebody's house who's very, very big, we can put it in. We do it for free, probably. All right, I'd like to thank Ken Poole, Elaine, and Gary for their presentations. Again, Amberly, Amanda, thank you for being here. Dawn, thanks for being here. That's pretty much it. There are a couple upcoming events. At the end of the month here, roast beef dinner start right here, end of the month. May 1st and the 8th, they're having the history scavenger hunt. It's on the back of your piece of your handout here if you want to read all of it. May 4th, the small museums and the Middlesex Heritage Group are sponsoring the Loyalist Refugee Crisis of 1779. That cataract surgery. I can see Elaine back there. There's a problem. How the Loyalists experienced the Revolutionary War, how their plights differed based on race and gender, and how the mass exodus of refugees had a ripple effect on the world. To be presented by Hanai Weber. The Rushville United Methodist Church between 2 and 4 on the 4th of May. The local Memorial Day Parade is going to be in Gorham this year on May 26th. And then this next one, July 12th, the 150th anniversary celebration of Overacre Schoolhouse. Last October, I woke up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and went, oh my God, it's the 150th anniversary of the schoolhouse and we haven't celebrated. And so I waited till 8 o'clock to send an email out to Amberley and all the members of the Middlesex Heritage Group. Amberley came back in 10 minutes with 8 ideas. So we're going to celebrate that on the 12th of July at the schoolhouse. Right? Okay. 3rd of August is our annual Citizens Appreciation Day. And on August 30th is the Seneca Heritage Day, which we have every year. And Peter Jemis will once again speak. And Bill Krause and the Allegheny Dancers will perform. Again, this is a great presentation. Thank you all for showing up. This is very supportive of our community. This is our history here. And that building there, the Overacre Corner Schoolhouse, is probably my favorite building in town. I drive by it. And Deb, the lights are working at night now. I don't know if we have lights that come on at night. That's very important too. So I can make the left-hand turn coming out of Naples and find my house. Anyway, thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, we'll be around for a while. You can sign up to get copies of the paintings, right?
Yep, if anybody wants it, copies.
Thank you all.